Greetings and good day. This is The Channeled Truth. I'm your host, Thomas Leichardt, and I'm a channeler myself, and I love exploring the works of Seth and Jane Roberts, Abraham-Hicks, and Bashar. And with me today, we have a very special guest that is no stranger to these channels. In fact, he has a book titled just that, Saith Abraham Bashar. And he's been on the show before in episodes 3, episodes 5. So let's give a warm welcome to Richard Gentle. Richard, thank you for coming onto the show.
Thanks, Tom. It's great to be back here.
Awesome. So today we're going to be discussing the Hawaiian practice of Hooponopono. And Richard has been utilizing this practice and relating it to the channels. So we're going to have this lovely conversation about the practice and how the channels interpret the idea of forgiveness and love and gratitude and so on. So Richard, I believe that you have something you can share with us and perhaps even just introduce our viewers to the practice itself. So take it away.
Right. Well, I was wanting to give you an introduction to Hooponopono and how it relates to the teachings of Seth Abraham and Bashar. And it's really the ancient Hawaiian practice of reconciliation and forgiveness. It's commonly translated as to make right. Often originally used to restore family relationships, and families would get together with the high priestess and relationships would be set right through prayer, discussion, confession, repentance, and mutual restitution and forgiveness. So it sounds a little bit religious, and I suppose in a way it has those connotations, but Hooponopono carries a significant extra with it, and that's a question to ask yourself with an emphasis on taking personal responsibility for your actions. And of course, you know, all our channels tell us that we must have personal responsibility in the way that we create our own realities. I'll come back to that question a little bit later. I also discovered just the other day that there's a place in the UK, north of Scotland, and they call it the Island of Discussion. And people in dispute are sent to the island with cheese and whiskey and forced to stay there until they can sort out their problems and reach mutual agreements. And anyway, going back to Hooponopono itself, I first came across it around 2012, and a friend of mine introduced me to it. And unusually for me, I just felt it wasn't for me. I wasn't really all that interested, so I thanked her very much and didn't really do anything with it. And then a few years later, another friend of mine was talking about something in relationships, and I suddenly remembered Hooponopono, and I said, well, you might be interested in this. It wasn't really my thing, but maybe you'd be interested. And she was so interested that she flew to Paris and did a course on Hooponopono. And then a bit later on, still wanting to know more, she actually went to Hawaii, and she was one of the last people who had a course with Dr. I Haleakala Hugh Len. That's a mouthful in itself, so even Hugh Len says, just call me Dr. Hugh Len. So she went out there and was one of his last cohorts. And so in between this, in 2007, Joe Vitale popularized Hooponopono in the West with his book called Zero Limits, The Secret Hawaiian System for Wealth, Health, Peace and More. And the story goes, and this is taken from Joe's book, that clinical psychologist Dr. Hugh Len had heard of a miracle worker called Morni Simeona, who was lecturing at hospitals, colleges, and even the United Nations. So he decided he'd go and meet her, and actually he witnessed her heal his own daughter of shingles. So Hugh decided he wanted to learn Morna's method, but he didn't instantly accept her odd ways. He signed up for a workshop led by her, and he actually walked out after 3 hours because he said she was talking to spirits and sounded nuts. However, he did return a week later, paid the tuition fee again, and tried to sit through another workshop with her. But he still couldn't do it, and everything she taught seemed so crazy to his university-trained mind that he again walked out of her seminar. And Hugh Len said, I went back a third time, and this time I stayed for the entire weekend. I still thought she was crazy, but something about her spoke to my heart. And ironically, he stayed with her until her transition in 1992. Hugh Len, incidentally, himself is no longer with us. He also made his transition, I think, a couple of years ago. Morna Simeona was the main proponent at the time of this technique of Hooponopono, and she actually developed something called Seth, which is self-identity through Hooponopono. And she had a placard on her desk, apparently, and it said, "Peace begins with me." And she said as well that with illness, science will often point to faults in DNA, whereas in Seth, it's seen as memories replaying in the subconscious mind. And then it was this business of accepting 100% personal responsibility for everything that happens in your life, taking responsibility for everyone's actions and not only for one's own. So between 1984 and 1987, Dr. Hugh Len was working on a ward for the criminally insane at the Hawaiian State Hospital. And when he was taken on, he decided he would try using Hooponopono. The ward where they kept the criminally insane was dangerous. Psychologists quit on a monthly basis. Staff often called in sick or simply quit. People would walk through the ward with their backs against the wall and afraid of being attacked by patients. But during that time, Hugh Len refused to attend staff meetings or see patients professionally. He never counselled with them, but he did agree to review their files. And while he looked at those files, he would work on himself. And as he worked on himself, patients began to heal. So after a few months, patients who had been shackled were being allowed to walk freely. Others who had been heavily medicated were getting their medications reduced. And those who had been seen as having no chance of ever being released were being freed. Hugh Len says he was absolutely in awe of this. And not only that, but the staff began enjoying coming to work. Absenteeism and turnover disappeared. And he said, we ended up with more staff than we needed because patients were being released and all the staff were showing up to work. But he says today that ward is closed. When asked what he was doing, Hugh Len replied, "I was simply cleaning the part of me that I shared with them." So before I continue, I would also just point out that if you attend a recognised course of Hooponopono, as my friend did, she brought back an absolute thick wodge of material, and it gets very involved, far beyond the popular 4 phrases that you may be already familiar with and that I'm soon to share with you. I also heard that some people feel a bit, that many practitioners who use Hooponopono actually treat it a bit too lightly by only using the phrases, and some of them only use it for gaining money. Well, I suppose in a flippant way, I might hold my hands up to that criticism a little bit, but I would also add that in my experience, using only those 4 phrases that we'll move on to later is extremely effective and keeps things simple. And I would add that I have never set out to use Hooponopono to gain money, but a side effect has sometimes resulted in receiving unexpected money, which is really, really strange. But I've got some examples later which I'll give you. I'll just mention what these magic phrases are, and then, Tom, if you'd like to come in on anything. So they are a mantra or a repeated sort of affirmation. And the one that is commonly used is, "I'm sorry, please forgive me, thank you, I love you." Now, Hugh Len once said, it doesn't matter which way around you use the mantra. And to be honest, I actually use, "I'm sorry, please forgive me, I love you, thank you." So have it any way around you like. Is there anything you'd like to come in on, Tom, on so far?
Yes, I definitely relate to that whole idea of personal responsibility, because as I've been reading and listening to these channels, one thing that keeps coming back over and over, all the way from Seth and you create your own reality, through Abraham and Bashar, that we create via vibration, the vibrations we put out, and Bashar often says what you put out is what you get back. That is really powerful and a cornerstone and a key for unlocking from all of these heavy third density, just, the heavy negative beliefs of powerlessness, where we seem to be at the mercy of other people's actions. We're waiting for other people or conditions to change so that we can be happy, right? That feels just very powerless just saying it. And these channels are all about taking that power back and taking personal responsibility for the vibration, the energy that we put out, and then letting that eventually come back in the reflective mirror of physical reality. And Bashar takes it a step further and says, it's not that you change when the outside changes. You change, you know you've changed when you respond differently, even when the outside looks the same, right? So it takes it to that level of, I own my vibration, and I'm not going to lock into insisting on reality being a certain way. It's, I create from vibration, not creating because I'm just reflecting and mirroring what the world seems to be offering to me, right? It's that whole analogy of being the thermostat in the room and setting the temperature with your vibration rather than being a thermometer and passively just reflecting the vibrations people are offering us, which often in this world are, not entirely positive. Let's just put it that way. So yeah, thank you for bringing that in. And I'm sure you have some lovely quotes and relationships to the channels you want to bring in as well.
Yes, I've certainly got a few which I'll bring in later on. One of the things I was going to mention about these phrases is I've tried to ask the question, what do these phrases mean? And one of the common complaints against using Hooponopono from some of the people that I've met is when they have to include forgiveness as part of one of the phrases, because they either do not feel they want to forgive someone or they do not feel that they need to be forgiven. And it can also sound for some people a little bit too religious, but obviously other people it doesn't bother them at all. And you have to look at these phrases more broadly. And also the point of Hooponopono is that you create everything that arises in your experience. So let's just hear a little bit about what our channels say, which I think matches some of this quite well. So here's a little quote from Seth. Because your private beliefs are shared with others, because there is interaction, then any determined change of direction on your part is felt by others, and they will react in their own fashion. So that's a Seth one. And Abraham says, we want to say to you that your thoughts change the behavior of everyone and everything who has anything to do with you. For your thoughts absolutely equal your point of attraction, and the better you feel, the more that everything and everyone around you improves. In the moment that you find an improved feeling, conditions and circumstances change to match your feeling. And Bashar says, physical reality is a reflection of your strongest beliefs. So just pausing a moment and asking, where are our private beliefs held? Now, I was thinking about this recently, and in human physical form, our beliefs are mostly held in our perception of memories stored in our brains. Notice here I'm not using the term mind, because your mind far expands the area of your brain that is interpreting your mind. I also liken mind to being a bit like that random access memory that you get in computers, that it's kind of, it deals with things, and when you switch the computer off, you lose it. Or recall only memory. I'm sure I can work out the right way around, but you know what I mean. There's a RAM and a ROM. One of them is actually retains things so that if you crash your computer, you can get all the information back. The other one only kind of remembers what you're doing on the computer at the time you're doing it. And then when you turn the computer off, it just empties itself. And I often think of our minds as a little bit like that in terms of our day-to-day working relationship. Now in Sith, the self-identity through Hooponopono, Mono Simeone said, with illness, science often points to faults in DNA, whereas in Sith it's seen as memories replaying in the subconscious mind. Now, obviously, I mentioned that earlier. And when Joe Vitale entitled his book Zero Limits, he was actually saying that through using Hooponopono, you aim to reduce your memories to a 0 point where you are no longer affected by dwelling on those things that upset you. And this provides room for letting go or surrendering. This is when circumstances can begin to change. I wonder if you'd like to make any further comment on that, Tom, before I move on to the quotes.
Yes, definitely. So first of all, forgiveness, right? I don't think of that as a religious term at all. It's a quality of energy. It's a vibration. And like you're playing off of what you've been saying is bringing things to zero, to neutrality. It's not necessarily that you let the memory go or that you don't have access to that anymore, but the emotional charge gets reduced. And forgiveness, we sometimes think colloquially, oh, I'm forgiving the other person. But it's really important to remember forgiveness is of the self too. Forgiving the self for, co-creating that kind of an experience, for holding on to the negativity for so long. And it's these energies, these things that we fester. It reminds me of this quote, which is often attributed to the Buddha, which, who knows, right? But the idea of, maintaining a grudge or anger towards somebody is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to get sick, right? We're the ones that get sick. So forgiveness is really about zeroing out, grounding out, or neutralizing these energies, right, that fester within the body. And, as an energy worker, energy healer, I see that all the time where, Western science talks about like, oh, these physical dysfunctions lead to these physical diseases. But I see all the time how it's energy, right? People hold grudges. Sometimes it's ancestral grudges, right? Sometimes it's passed on from generation to generation. And it's just this tight negative energy that as I help a person unwind that, lo and behold, their health improves, right? So forgiveness is the person that benefits the most is us, right? And then, like you're saying, that energy goes out and ripples out and affects the energy of others, right? If they choose to be affected. But it's like Bashar says, what you put out is what you get back. When you make those internal shifts, now you're radiating that vibration out. And then it's the most likely time that something positive will come back, right? Even though we don't expect it to, right? Bashar is really a stickler on no insistence on the outcome, right? Because forgiveness in and of itself, it's like you're already going into a healed state, and it's like, who cares what other people do, right? That's none of our business. But the side effect, let's say, that of that kind of powerful practice is that things tend to shift around you, right? But we don't do it for that. We do it for our own shift and our own healing and the capacity to put out this pure positive vibration. So thank you for that. And I'm sure you've got a lot more to share as well.
I was just thinking when you were saying, past lives or past memories from other times, obviously, Seth would say it's our multiple personalities, both past, present and future, all existing simultaneously in what he calls the spacious present. And this is actually really helpful for us as a sort of an aside, because you can tune in to other aspects of your personality. So I think, I've often thought, we have our own oversoul that really is at the top of all our various personalities through time and space and in the spacious present. But we're also all feeding back to each other. So everything that we do now are feeding back to my future and past selves and entities. And we're working together and we're expanding simultaneously in the spacious present, which makes everything that we do incredibly complex and going beyond our normal human comprehension. But one of the things that Morno Simeona was saying herself about Hooponopono is that, you are dealing with sometimes things that are residual energies from other experiences. So it does tie in. But I haven't really gone too much into that because I was going to keep it still simple. So I'm just going to mention a couple more quotes from the channels. So Seth says, what exists physically exists first in thought and feeling. Abraham, if you've got somebody's aspects in your experience that you don't like, there's only one reason they're there. You keep evoking them with your attention to them. Without knowing about law of attraction, you have, through your old habit of observation, achieved vibrational harmony with the parts of them that you do not like, and you keep summoning those parts from them by your constant vibrational offering of them. And Bashar says, what would I have to believe is true about myself in this situation to feel, think, act this way, and or to get this reality reflection? Now, Bashar's point brings me to that important question I mentioned earlier that Dr. Hugh Len gives us. And he says, in any situation where you feel that something isn't as you'd like it, or you're upset by something, the first thing you should do is say to yourself, what is going on in me that I am obtaining this experience? And that relates very much to that point that Bashar just made. Hugh then realised that for mentally ill patients to be in his awareness, he had created them in his experience. It has also been remarked that anyone familiar with the situation now knows of the situation, and they too must clean using Hooponopono. And this is another reason that I'm just sticking mainly to the 4 phrases. I'm sorry, please forgive me, I love you, thank you. Because when it gets very involved, you get to the point where Hugh Len was actually cleaning using these phrases and Hooponopono every moment of every day of his remaining life. And he'd even go into a room and ask the room, do you mind if I actually do my seminar in this room? And if he got the impression that the room didn't want him there, then he'd actually go and find another room. So all the time he was working on trying to clean the thoughts and the vibrations within himself that could be affecting the feedback he was getting. So very often when we experience a problem, we immediately bring to bear the rational mind. We focus so much on the problem that we overthink the problem and we block the flow of possible solutions. And in fact, I think that I could actually say now that Tom and I were discussing this talk yesterday a little bit, and I was having a lot of technical problems trying to get everything in the right place. And I spent a whole day working on the technical bit and forgot all about putting this talk together for its final delivery. And I realised that I was overthinking everything. And we've just come back today and I've just assembled a little gadget to be able to record. And it took me 5 minutes and I didn't have any problems with it at all. So, you know, that is another sort of typical thing about overthinking. A friend of mine, when I told him I was doing a talk on this, he said, tell Richard he should use Hooponopono. So that sort of made me laugh a bit. So by using Hooponopono, my feeling is that we hand over our concerns to the universe, to something greater than ourselves. And I liken it to putting ourselves in the hands of a specialist expert whom we absolutely trust. And when you give your problem to someone else that you trust, you no longer have to hold on to it. This inadvertently puts you into what we might borrow from Seth and call a framework 2 mindset. So that's the non-physical environment of our experience, which in turn activates what Seth refers to as the magical approach. And you find your rational mind gets out of the way, your attention is off the worry, and the cross currents of resistance are suspended. And Abraham often says, you know, you stop things happening because you've got these cross currents of resistance. Everything's there ready for you, and then you go and put something in the way, even if it's momentarily. And so I'll let you come in again, Tom, before I go on with the next little section of quotes.
Yeah, just one little thing. I think it's interesting there is this discrepancy between Bashar and Abraham a little bit. And I have a feeling it comes more through how people interpret it versus what they're actually putting forth. But that whole idea of attention, right? Like my experience and what Bashar tends to say, it's not so much attention, because you can look at negative things with a neutral response or even in compassion. And you can also look at negative events and get really riled up by it, right? And it's the energy with which you observe that makes a difference between what comes to you, what your point of attraction is, right? So Bashar often says, you know, the more you expand your consciousness, you see more of everything, both positive and negative, right? Because you're expanding consciousness and it's a process of inclusion, not exclusion, right? And Abraham really hammers the point home about what you put your focus on determines your point of attraction. But I'm going to combine these 2 ideas here and express that, you know, it's not just what you're looking at, it's your reaction to what you're looking at that matters, right? Because I can look at, you know, a person that has a serious medical condition, and if I lock up and start feeling this sense of angst or feeling a kind of sympathetic resonance with them, then I fall into that vibration, right? But as a healer, I'm constantly, you know, seeing people in dramatic conditions sometimes, and I just bring in that sense of love and compassion and healing energy and connecting to higher mind and source and flowing this pure positive healing energy. And so that's my point of attraction, right? And maybe it becomes the patient's point of attraction too, right? But so that's the idea. Is I wanted to tease that apart because this is one of those differences in interpretation, I believe, rather than delivery between Abraham and Bashar. So just a side note here.
Yeah, no, I think that's very true, and it reminded me of that thing about the man in the prison. Two people in prison. One of them only sees the bars, and the other one sees the view behind the bars. You know, it's sort of a different way of interpreting the same sort of situation. And that was just reminded me of that sort of a story.
Absolutely. And also the way Bashar often talks about how, you know, which this totally lines up with the Hooponopono, is we create our reality, but that doesn't mean that other people don't exist, right? They exist, but we create our version of them in our reality, right? So what we perceive of the person becomes our interpretation of them through our energy, because we're perceiving ourselves and we're in our own universe. And so that's where the work is, right? It's clearing that perception, the doors of perception, or the belief systems, the frames through which we see people, that once we start looking at people in a different way rather than automatically triggered into negative response, all of a sudden, very often we find that either they fall out of vibration and out of our reality, or they begin to shift and match our frequency because we're calling forth from them those parts that are more in alignment with who we truly are, because we're being true to ourselves. So that's where the power is maintaining that vibration. Even when we look at people, you know, this doctor was talking about looking at mentally challenged people, right? But choosing to stay in that positive, pure positive vibration, even when observing people that are out of alignment, gives them that opportunity to really shift, right? So yeah, that's powerful. It's magical, dare I say, you know, as a practice.
Yeah. And in fact, these next few quotes really touch on that, and particularly the last one from Bashar. But I'll just give you this one from Seth. To solve a problem, you begin to minimize its characteristics, diminish its importance, rob it of your attention, and refuse it your energy. And Abraham says, people often believe that because something happened, and because it is a fact or true, that it should be focused upon, and therefore kept vibrationally active. And so many people keep many things active that do not serve them. And Bashar famously says, and this is one of Bashar's well-known quotes, circumstances do not determine your state of being. Your state of being determines your circumstances. Circumstances, therefore, do not matter. Only your state of being matters. And I think, you know, you'll be very familiar with that one, Tom, and it ties in, I think, quite well with the whole nature of the Hooponopono experience. So in a minute, I'll give you a few personal examples.
Absolutely. And that last one from Bashar it really helped me unlock from so much negativity, is, you know, and even the way he draws it out in one of the sessions, how he plays with the word matter to materialize, right? So circumstances don't matter because they've already materialized. It's what is. State of being is what matters, because your state of being is what's going to determine what you get out of this situation. You can frame it in a positive way, at least a neutral way, or you can respond with a negative vibration and go into a negative state, and then you just perpetuate the negativity, right? So that's the true mastery, right? It just kind of reminds me of the martial artist that's just so in the flow and so connected that even when bodily harm is coming to their, you know, to their body, they are able to just shift around and play with the energy like a dance, right? And energetically, same thing. You know, people offer us all kinds of vibrations, but we're always able to use it in a positive way when we are really truly centered in that state of being.
I was just thinking, you know, that when you were saying a minute ago about what we're experiencing is something that's happened, you know, already. And I often feel that we talk about past, present and future in our society, but actually we are living in the past more than we are the present, because what we're seeing in our present is everything that we've created in the past manifest in that moment. So we're actually living a little bit in our past. And this is why Seth often says, you've got to have a different thought and project that out first before you see a change. But he does do a nod to our linear time problems here, and says that for a while you will feel that perhaps nothing's happening, but don't worry, it sure is happening. I'm just paraphrasing there. I think that's the other thing about Hooponopono, that things do change. And I often say to people, give it at least a week of trying it. But of course, bear in mind that the time when you don't want to use Hooponopono is when you most need it. So you can really feel in a bad mood and really fed up with someone, and the last thing you want to do is Hooponopono, which can actually help you. But I'll give you an example of a friend of mine who had always had some difficulty emotionally with her father. He was quite strict. He was a bit putting down on the fact that she was female, and that she should have her and her mother used to think, females shouldn't go and get educated or drive. They were, traditional family kind of environment. And it just made it a bit difficult for her. And she was educated and she did very well at university. And she had a brother as well who perhaps didn't do those things. But of course, the brother was male and perceived a bit differently. And one day, this is my friend that did the Hooponopono with Hugh Len. And she decided to try it on her father. And over a period of a couple of weeks, she was doing Hooponopono. And then she noticed that one day when she went round, his demeanour had changed and he was a bit nicer to her, a bit more friendly. The next time she went round, he was so pleased and overjoyed to see her. And he'd actually entered a period of decline himself with, I don't know if it was what it was exactly, but not dementia, but something similar. And he was actually really loving towards her. And in the end, he was so loving towards her that he kept offering her things. And she actually had to say, no, Dad, it's all right. You don't have to give me all these things. So that really turned the relationship round for her. And when he actually passed, out of all the people in the family, she actually ended up with the best relationship with her father than any of them. Now, I've sometimes had difficulty with my own father because we are quite different people in lots of ways. And he had similar aspects where I think he felt that certain things should happen a certain way and I should achieve certain things in a certain way and go about things in the way that he would go about them. And so I said to my friend, I don't think Hooponopono will work on my father. For ages, I kept putting on not trying it. And then eventually I thought, well, I'll try it anyway. I don't hold out much hope for this. And but it did really change things. And he also started to be warmer towards me. In fact, it didn't only just affect me, but also my younger brother and sister. And we all benefited quite a bit through his slight change. Nobody told him to change. Nobody said that, we're fed up with the way you were being to us or anything. I just simply did Hooponopono, and one thing changed another and changed another. And that's the great thing about this technique. You don't have to work out or think how it should happen. And this goes back to some of the things that our channeled friends say. Don't work out what's got to happen. Just let things unfold. And no matter how the outcome is, accept that outcome. And I think Hooponopono really gives you a bit of a fast track to experiencing that.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for sharing those stories, including the personal story. And it just reminds me of what the channels, especially Bashar, often says is, we're here to transform great darkness into light, right? So as souls on a higher level, we choose these challenging environments. And then the journey of life, the hero's journey, if you will, is to take on the limitation at first, but then to begin to break out of it and to enjoy that process of liberation and the unfolding of shifting out of not accepting the negativity, in the case of the female, right, not accepting that, so since she's a female, she should be lower class or whatever. She went and did her things, but not only that, changed the energy, the dynamic, right? That's powerful. I feel like that's the life journey is, taking the limitations and just transforming that darkness to light, limitation to freedom, bondage, to release, all of that process. And that's the joy of life. And it sounds like this Hooponopono practice is one of the powerful tools that people can use.
Yeah, certainly. I've been exploring this stuff for over 40 years, and I've tried many, many different things, and I've got a lot of tools in the toolkit that I can draw upon. But I have to say that out of everything that I've ever tried, this has been the most miraculous that I've ever come across, partly because of its simplicity and partly because you don't have to kind of work out what the outcome should be. You don't have to sort of think, oh yes, my dad's going to be nice and he's going to do this with me and that with me or anything else. All you have to do is I'm sorry, please forgive me, thank you, I love you, or I love you, thank you, whatever order you choose, and just let it happen, whatever happens. And I'll give you a couple of other examples. I was part of a group, music group, and the person who ran the group died, and a message came around from the other friends of the group by email saying that he'd passed over. And I thought I'll mention it privately to a couple of friends on Facebook, social media, because nothing had really been said in the email about anything else. It was just giving the information. But I remember intuitively when I posted it, I thought, I don't know whether this is a good idea or not, but I ignored my intuition and I posted it anyway. And there were some really nice comments. And then I went out for the day. And when I got back, I got an email from someone else and said, Richard, could you please take down that message that you put, because the daughter of the person concerned hasn't been able to tell some members of their family yet. And if they see it on social media first before she gets to them, it's going to be a bit upsetting. So I felt absolutely mortified of creating this faux pas, as they say. And I felt so embarrassed about the whole thing. Obviously, I took it down. And the only reason I hadn't taken it down before was because there'd been some nice messages. And of course, I'd forgotten that he was actually one of my friends. So it appeared on his Facebook. And that's how people knew that I'd posted it. And I'd completely forgotten, because he never really used Facebook that much, but we were friends on it. And so what happened then was rather strange, because somebody said, could you make a web page so that the daughter can find out how many people want to attend the funeral or how many people want to attend the wake afterwards? And I said, yeah, I'm happy to do that. So I started doing this sort of thing, and then the daughter was dealing with me directly and saying how much she liked the page and everything else. And I was doing Hooponopono like mad. I mean, that night I did Hooponopono constantly, and when I do it, I actually do it this way, and I go, I love you, I'm sorry, please forgive me, thank you. I love you, I'm sorry, please forgive me, thank you. I love you, I'm sorry, please forgive me, thank you. I do it really quite rapidly and very continually until my brain just gets tired. So it could take 14, 15, 20 minutes of doing this. And the next day, when I went onto the computer, I just had the person saying how much she was so pleased with everything I'd done. And I was actually thinking to myself, I wasn't intending to go to the funeral because it was a long way away, but I wanted to go to the wake. But I was so embarrassed by what I'd done, I thought I can't even show my face. But in the end, I felt so much better having done Hooponopono. The response to me was very positive. I actually thought, does she know it was me that made this mistake? And I think she obviously did, but it didn't come into any conversation. So I go there on the day of the wake and meet everybody. And when I get there, I've never met his daughter before, but we recognized each other from photos. And she came over and gave me a really big hug and said, oh, thanks ever so much for all the help you've done. And she gave me a card, which I put in my pocket. A bit later on, somebody said to me, have you opened your card? And I said, well, I haven't, because I was going to open it sort of privately at home, And she said, well, you ought to open it. So I opened the card, and lying inside was a brand new £20 note. Now, you can call it dollars if you like for the convenience. So but underneath it was another one, and then another one, and they were so new they were really flat inside the card. And she'd given me £100 as a way of thank you for everything that you've done. So this is why I say to you that by accident, money does sometimes materialize if it's appropriate with doing Ho'oponopono, but it shouldn't be your aim, really. Your aim should be to improve a situation, to make things right, to feel better, to have a change of circumstances surrounding your inner being that you're projecting out.
Nice.
I'll let you come in on there, Tom.
Yeah, no, thank you for that story, because things are connected synchronistically, and when we shift our vibration, we shift our point of attraction, we literally step into a new reality, right? As Bashar likes to say, we're shifting through parallel realities all the time, and when we shift our vibration, we shift to those realities that are commensurate with the vibration we're putting out. And so the world just becomes more magical, right? Seth had a book that he put out, The Magical Approach, right? And it's getting out of that rational mind, the physically focused mind, and expanding out into the higher mind. But you can't really do that if you're holding on to grudges and stuck in this negative belief, oh, I did something wrong, oh, bad me, It's like, no, that's not that frequency that really begins to open up to the higher mind, because the higher mind does not see us that way, right? The higher mind sees us as pure positive potential having a physical experience. So we have to line up with that first, and this practice can just be such a powerful way of unlocking from those negativities and just letting that synchronicity flow, which is guided by the higher mind, and just feeling like you're just embraced by that loving, pure positive energy. So Richard, thank you for sharing everything on the show today. And I really feel like there's an episode 2 here, because we covered a lot of ground, but I feel like we barely got started. I think you probably agree. So we'll close out this episode for now, and let's do an episode 2 soon when you have the time. And I feel like there's more stories to share, more things to dig into. But for now, to our viewers, I'm going to say, take the time to meditate on those phrases. Even if you don't have someone specific in mind, just meditate on those 4 phrases of Hooponopono and just see how that shifts your vibration. Play with it, experiment with no insistence on the outcome, as Bashar likes to say. And if you do have a specific instance or issue or challenge, try it with that. Be playful. Let creation be like molding the clay rather than just blind reaction to negative beliefs, because, oh, I'm going to react this way because, oh, everybody knows you're supposed to react that way, right? No, we have choices, right? And this is another tool in the toolkit. So to our viewers out there, thank you so much for joining us for this journey. There will be many more. And if you'd like to be a guest on the show, please reach out to me and let me know. And to help us out, help the channel, please, share the video, like, subscribe to the channel. That does help us out a lot. And we will wish you just a transformative time. Use these tools and let this episode and this information and this energy inspire you to make that change, to be the change, right? And to put out that energy, to put out that energy of alignment and radiate that and let that be your power. So with that, we will be signing off, and we will see you in the next episode.